the clink of silverware against plates, the familiar aroma of pot roast drifting through the dining room. My father's voice, cold as January frost. "We've decided to leave everything to your brother." 5 seconds of silence that changed everything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply excused myself, checked my phone, and canceled every automatic payment I'd been making on their behalf for years. Their mortgage, their utilities, their property taxes, all of it. They thought they could erase me from their future? Fine. I'd let them experience life without my support in the present. What they didn't know was that I held the ultimate card, the deed to the very house they planned to leave to my brother. Sometimes the most devastating power move isn't what you say. It's what you reveal when the time is right. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. I'm 34, unmarried, and until recently, I was the backbone of my family, though no one seemed to notice. I'm a physical therapist at Westlake Medical Center, helping people rebuild their strength after injuries and surgeries. The irony isn't lost on me that I've spent years helping strangers stand on their own 2 feet, while simultaneously carrying my entire family on my back. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Mapleton were sacred, not by my choice, but by my mother's insistence and my own sense of duty. "Family comes first," she'd say, usually while I was elbow-deep in some household task that my younger brother Tyler never seemed to notice needed doing. That particular Sunday began like any other. I arrived at their craftsman-style home, the one with the wraparound porch my father had always promised to restore but never did. I'd brought dessert, a homemade strawberry cheesecake that had taken me 3 hours to perfect that morning, though I'd been on call at the hospital until 2 a.m. the night before. "Oh, you brought another cheesecake?" Mom said, taking it from my hands with a distracted smile. "Tyler's bringing his new girlfriend tonight. I hope she's not watching her figure." I bit back a retort about how my cheesecakes were actually quite light compared to the store-bought ones Mom usually served. It wasn't worth the argument. Nothing ever was. The kitchen was chaotic as usual. A pot of something was boiling over on the stove. Dad was attempting to carve a roast at the counter, making a mess of it. I silently moved to turn down the burner, then reached for a proper carving knife to hand to my father. "Thanks, Beck," he said absently, not looking up. "How's work?" "Busy. We've got a new rehabilitation program starting for stroke patients that I'm helping to—" "That's nice," he interrupted, attention already elsewhere. "Could you set the table? Your mother's been on her feet all day." I glanced at Mom, who was scrolling through her phone at the kitchen island, her feet propped up on a stool. She didn't look up. The familiar weight of invisibility settled over me as I gathered plates and silverware. 7 years of higher education, a thriving career helping people recover from life-altering injuries. And in this house, I was still just the daughter who could set a proper table and fix whatever was broken. I'd just finished arranging the water glasses when the front door burst open, bringing a gust of autumn air and my brother's booming laugh. Tyler had always known how to fill a room, with his voice, his energy, his demands for attention. "The party has arrived," he announced, ushering in a willowy blonde who looked barely old enough to order a drink. "Everyone, this is Kaylee." Mom practically flew from her seat to embrace them both. Dad abandoned his carving to shake Tyler's hand vigorously, clapping him on the shoulder with obvious pride. The roast sat forgotten as they fussed over Tyler and his new girlfriend, asking about her job, social media manager, whatever that meant. Her family, father owned car dealerships in 3 counties. Her hobbies, hot yoga and something about sustainable fashion. I finished slicing the roast properly and carried it to the table. "Oh, Beck's here too," Tyler said, finally noticing me as I set down the platter. "Hey, sis, this is Kaylee." "Nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand. "I've heard absolutely nothing about you." Tyler rolled his eyes. Always the comedian. Kaylee smiled uncertainly and took a seat at the table, my seat, the one I'd occupied at Sunday dinners for the past decade, but I didn't correct her. Instead, I moved to the chair at the far end, the one with the wobbly leg I'd been meaning to fix. Dinner proceeded with Tyler dominating the conversation, regaling us with stories from his job at a tech startup where he'd worked for all of 8 months. His position was something vague involving marketing or customer relations. It seemed to change every time he described it. Actually, he said, pausing dramatically after his third helping of roast, I have some news. Mom leaned forward eagerly. Dad stopped eating. I've been offered a promotion, Tyler announced. Junior VP of Client Experience. The table erupted in congratulations. Mom actually clapped her hands together like she was at a theater performance. That's my boy, Dad beamed. Always knew you'd go far. What does that position entail? I asked, genuinely curious. Tyler waved his hand vaguely. Oh, overseeing the client satisfaction metrics, strategic relationship management, that sort of thing. I nodded, though his description had clarified nothing. It comes with a decent raise, Tyler continued, so I'm thinking of upgrading my apartment. Maybe looking at one of those new luxury buildings downtown. Those are expensive, I noted. Starting at what, $2,800 a month? Something like that, Tyler said with a shrug. But you've got to invest in yourself, right? I thought about the $1,200 mortgage payment on my modest 2-bedroom condo that I'd made faithfully for 8 years, building equity while staying within my means. I also thought about the $850 I'd transferred to my parents' account yesterday to cover their property insurance payment, something I'd been doing quarterly for the past 3 years, ever since Dad's hours at the manufacturing plant had been cut. Speaking of investments, Mom said, serving dessert, my cheesecake, which she presented as if she'd made it herself. Your father and I have been doing some estate planning. My ears perked up. I'd been gently suggesting they update their will and consider long-term care insurance for years. Perhaps they'd finally taken my advice. We met with Harold Bergman last week, Dad said, mentioning their longtime lawyer. Got everything squared away. That's great, I said, genuinely relieved. Did you look into that long-term care policy I suggested? The premiums go up significantly after 65, so it's really better to... We've decided to keep things simple, Dad interrupted, using his authoritative tone, the one that had intimidated me as a child, but now just sounded tired. The house, our savings, my pension benefits. Everything will go to Tyler. The strawberry cheesecake turned to ash in my mouth. I set my fork down carefully, the small clink against the plate deafening in my ears. Everything? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. It just makes sense, Mom explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Tyler will need the financial foundation to really establish himself. You're already settled with your career and that practical condo of yours. I looked at Tyler, certain he would express shock, perhaps even discomfort at this blatant favoritism. Instead, he nodded as if they were discussing something as trivial as the weather forecast. Plus, he added, helping himself to another slice of my cheesecake, I've always loved this house. I've got big plans for it once it's mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thinking about knocking out that wall between the kitchen and dining room, putting in one of those fancy islands with the waterfall countertops. They were discussing renovations to a house that my parents still lived in, that I'd helped maintain, for years that I'd assumed would be divided equally between their 2 children as any reasonable parent would plan. When did you decide this? I asked, directing the question to my father. He shifted in his seat, the first sign of discomfort he'd shown. We've been thinking about it for a while. The paperwork will be finalized next week. I see. I reached for my water glass, took a small sip. My mind was racing through a mental inventory. The new roof I'd helped finance 3 years ago because the old one was leaking into the attic where family photos were stored. The property taxes I'd been covering since Dad's hours were cut. The utility bills I paid automatically from my account each month because Mom had complained about the complicated online payment systems these companies now used. "Don't look so serious, Beck," Tyler laughed, reaching across to punch my arm lightly. "It's not like they're dying tomorrow. This is just boring paperwork stuff." "It's not boring to me," I said quietly. "It's my inheritance, too." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Kaylee, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly became very interested in her napkin. "Honey," Mom said, using her placating voice, "you've always been so practical. You understand that Tyler will have different needs. With your career, you'll always be comfortable." Different needs. The phrase landed like a slap. What she meant was, Tyler needs more because we value him more. Tyler deserves more because we've always expected less of him. 28 years of being the responsible one. Of driving home at midnight when Dad had gallbladder surgery. Of researching Medicare, supplements when Mom couldn't be bothered. Of fixing leaky faucets and programming their TV remote and remembering to send flowers on family birthdays, including Tyler's. All of it erased with a single conversation over dessert. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply excused myself to use the bathroom where I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I hardly recognized. Someone who had spent so long being reliable that she'd forgotten to demand respect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A calendar notification. Transfer $275 for Parents Electric. Bill. I stared at the alert, then opened my banking app. There they were, all the recurring transfers I'd set up. The electric bill, water, internet, the extra payment on their mortgage I'd been making for 36 months straight. I scrolled through my transaction history, calculating roughly how much I'd contributed to this household in just the past year. The total made me feel slightly dizzy. Then I opened my documents folder and found a file I'd nearly forgotten. The paperwork from when I'd co-signed their refinance loan 4 years ago when interest rates dropped. Dad's credit score had taken a hit after some medical bills went to collections, bills I eventually paid off, so the bank required a co-signer with stronger credit. I read through the legal language carefully, seeing it with new eyes. Then I took one more deep breath, closed the apps, and returned to the dining table. Thinking about converting Rebecca's old room into a home office, Tyler was saying, gesturing expansively. Once all the paperwork is done, of course. You'll need to pay the property taxes before making any renovations, I said mildly, taking my seat. They're due next month. Dad waved dismissively. That's all taken care of. Is it? I asked, pulling out my phone again. Because I've been the one paying them for the past 3 years. I turned my screen toward him, showing the transaction history. The table went completely silent. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That was just temporary help, Dad said, his voice losing some of its certainty. While things were tight. I've also been paying half your mortgage, I continued scrolling through more transactions. And all of your utilities, and the insurance. Tyler's smug expression faltered. Wait, what? Rebecca has been helping us out during a rough patch, Mom explained quickly, as if reframing it would change the reality. That's what family does. Yes, it is, I agreed, setting my phone down carefully. And since Tyler is now the future, owner of everything, it seems only fair that he should take over these financial responsibilities immediately. I opened my banking app again and, with 3 quick taps, canceled every recurring payment I'd set up for their household. The action was both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering you can fly. You can't just stop paying our bills because you're upset about the will, Mom said, her voice rising slightly. That's petty. It's not, petty to stop giving gifts that aren't appreciated," I corrected her. "It's self-respect." Dad's face had darkened to an alarming shade of red. "Now listen here, Rebecca. We raised you better than this." "You raised me to be responsible," I agreed, gathering my purse. "I'm simply transferring that responsibility to the person you've deemed most valuable to your future." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and thanked my mother for dinner, as if we'd just had a lovely, normal meal. As I walked to the door, I heard Tyler's confused voice asking, "What bills? How much are we talking about?" I closed the door softly behind me, got into my car, and drove home in perfect silence. For the first time in years, their financial problems weren't mine to solve. The realization felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. 3 days passed before the first text message arrived. "Mom, having trouble with the internet. Can you come take a look when you have a chance?" I responded simply, "I'm working late shifts this week. Have Tyler check the router." 5 days after that, another message, this time from Dad. "Got a notice from the water company about a missed payment. Is there some problem with your auto-pay setup?" I forwarded the message to Tyler with a simple note. "FYI, they need help with this." By the 2-week mark, the messages had become more frequent and increasingly urgent. The power company had sent a warning. The mortgage payment was overdue. The homeowner's insurance was about to lapse. I read each message, acknowledged receipt, but offered no solutions. Years of being the family fixer had trained them to expect immediate rescue. My silence was perhaps the loudest statement I'd ever made. Then came a voicemail from Tyler, his usual confidence replaced by confusion and a hint of panic. "Beck, what the hell? Mom and Dad say you've been paying all their bills. For how long? They're getting notices from every company in town and they're expecting me to handle it now, but I can't afford all this on top of my own expenses. Call me back." I didn't. Instead, I took myself out to a nice dinner at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try, but had deemed too expensive, roughly equivalent to what I'd been spending monthly on my parents' internet and TV package. 3 weeks after that fateful Sunday, dinner, Mom called and invited me for just a casual lunch, nothing fancy. When I arrived, the house was spotless, and she'd prepared my favorite chicken marsala with wild rice, a dish she only made when she wanted something significant. "We've missed you at Sunday dinners," she said, serving me a generous portion. "It hasn't been the same." Dad joined us, uncharacteristically subdued. He picked at his food for several minutes before clearing his throat. "Your mother and I have been reconsidering some things," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "About the estate planning." "Oh?" I took a small bite, chewing slowly. "We're thinking now that a 50-50 split between you and Tyler would be more appropriate," Mom interjected brightly. "That seems fair, doesn't it?" I set down my fork. "And the bills?" Dad shifted in his chair. "Well, we were hoping you might reconsider helping out with some of the household expenses, just until things stabilize. Tyler's trying, but with his rent and car payment." There it was. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a partial retreat with the expectation that I'd resume financial support while accepting half of what they'd originally denied me entirely. "I don't think that arrangement works for me," I said quietly. "But thank you for lunch. The chicken is excellent." As I stood to leave, Dad's composure cracked. "Rebecca, be reasonable. We can't manage all these expenses on our fixed income. The late fees are piling up, and now the mortgage company is sending certified letters." "I'm sure Tyler will figure something out," I replied. "After all, he's getting the house." I walked out, ignoring my mother's protests behind me. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finally demanding the respect I'd earned through years of silent support. Over the next month, the consequences multiplied. From Tyler's increasingly desperate texts I gathered that the electricity had been shut off for 2 days. The internet remained disconnected. The lawn, which I'd always maintained, grew wild and unkempt. Tyler's attempts to fill the financial gap proved woefully inadequate. His self-proclaimed great salary barely covered his own expensive apartment and the lease on his luxury SUV, let alone the mortgage on our parents' home and all the accumulated utilities. Then came the call I'd been half expecting. Dad? His voice strained and missing its usual authority. The bank sent another notice. They're talking about initiating foreclosure if we miss another payment. That sounds serious? I acknowledged, keeping my tone neutral. Have you considered selling? The market in Mapleton is quite strong right now. Selling? He sputtered. This is our home, Rebecca. Your childhood home. We can't just abandon it because of a temporary cash flow problem. It's not temporary, though, is it? I asked gently. It's been this way for years. The only difference is that I'm no longer covering the gap. After we hung up, I received a series of increasingly distressed texts from Mom, culminating in, "Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high from all this stress. Is that what you want to happen?" For the first time in my adult life, I didn't drop everything to solve their crisis. I didn't rush over with my blood pressure cuff and gentle reminders about Dad's medication. Instead, I forwarded the message to Tyler. Dad needs his pressure checked and probably his medication adjusted. The prescription information is at Wilson's Pharmacy on Main. 6 weeks after I'd walked out of that Sunday dinner, my doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I checked through the peephole, I saw my parents standing there, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Tyler stood slightly behind them, his usual confident posture noticeably absent. I opened the door but didn't immediately invite them in. "Hi," Mom said, attempting a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." "Were you?" I asked, knowing full well they rarely left their side of town. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca, we need to talk. About the house. About everything." I stepped aside, allowing them into my condo. They entered hesitantly, as if crossing into foreign territory. In a way, they were. Despite living just 20 minutes away, they'd visited my home perhaps 3 times in the 8 years I'd owned it. "Nice place," Tyler muttered, glancing around at the tasteful furniture and artwork I'd carefully selected over the years. "It looks different." "I redecorated," I explained, though he wouldn't know. The difference. He'd never paid attention to my space before. We settled in my living room, an uncomfortable tableau of forced casualness. Mom perched on the edge of the sofa, as if afraid to fully commit her weight to it. Dad sat stiffly in the armchair, hands resting on his knees. Tyler leaned against the wall, trying to appear relaxed but failing. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice," Dad finally said, breaking the strained silence. "We have 30 days to bring the mortgage current or they'll initiate proceedings." I nodded, waiting. "Tyler's been trying to help," Mom added quickly, as if defending him from unspoken criticism. "But with his own expenses—" "My rent just went up," Tyler interjected. "And the condo association at their place added some special assessment for the exterior painting project." "I see," I said, my voice deliberately calm. "And what would you like me to do about this situation?" The direct question seemed to startle them. For so long, they hadn't needed to ask for my help. I'd simply provided it automatically, invisibly, without requiring acknowledgement. "We need your help," Dad admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "Financially." "And we've reconsidered the will situation," Mom added hurriedly. "We're going to split everything 50-50. That's fair, isn't it?" I studied their faces, the expectant looks, the assumption that this compromise would immediately restore my financial support. They still didn't understand. "I have something I need to show you," I said, standing and walking to my home office. When I returned, I carried a folder containing documents I'd retrieved from my safe the day after that Sunday dinner. I placed the folder on the coffee table and slid it toward my father. He opened it cautiously, as if it might contain something dangerous. In a way, it did. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the papers inside. "It's the deed to the house," I replied calmly, "with my name on it." The silence was absolute. Even Tyler pushed himself away from the wall, taking a step closer to see. "What are you talking about?" Mom whispered. "When you refinanced the mortgage 4 years ago to cover Dad's medical bills after his heart procedure, you couldn't qualify on your own. Your credit score was too low, and the debt-to-income ratio wasn't acceptable to the bank. Remember? You needed a co-signer with stronger credit and income." Dad's face had gone pale. "But that was just for the loan application. We didn't." "You didn't read the paperwork," I finished for him. "I did. The title was transferred to my name as part of the agreement. I've been the legal owner of the house for 4 years. I've also been paying that refinanced mortgage directly to the bank, along with half of the original loan, plus the property taxes and insurance." "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked, her voice barely audible. "Because it didn't matter then," I said simply. "I was happy to help without recognition or thanks. But things have changed now, haven't they?" Dad slumped back in the chair. "So what happens now? You own our house and we're just... what? Tenants?" "That depends," I said, reclaiming the folder. "We need to establish some new terms." We moved to my dining room, where I'd spent countless evenings helping my parents navigate Medicare enrollment forms and property tax exemption applications. Now I sat across from them, not as their dutiful daughter, but as the owner of their home. "Here's what I propose," I began, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I'll bring the mortgage current and continue making payments. You can remain living in the house under certain conditions." "Conditions?" Dad repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him in this context. "First, the will gets rewritten. Equal shares between Tyler and me, with transparent terms that we both review and agree to." Mom nodded quickly. "Of course, we can call Harold tomorrow." "Second, we establish a realistic household budget that doesn't rely on my subsidies. You contribute what you can afford from your retirement income, and I'll cover the remainder as an investment in property I now legally own." Dad started to object, but Mom placed a hand on his arm. "Third," I continued, "we acknowledge the truth of our family dynamic. No more pretending that my contributions are temporary or emergency measures. No more acting like Tyler's responsibilities and mine are drastically different." Tyler looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "And finally," I said, my voice softening slightly, "we start over. As equals. Not as parents who make unilateral decisions or children who are valued differently, but as adults who respect each other's contributions and boundaries." The silence stretched until Dad finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "When did you become so authoritative?" "I've always been this person," I replied quietly. "You just never had to notice before." Over the next 6 months, our family reconstructed itself around these new realities. The lawyer drew up paperwork that protected everyone's interests. Mom and Dad downsized their expenses, selling their second car and cutting back on unnecessary expenses. Tyler found a roommate to share his apartment costs, allowing him to contribute more to our parents' household expenses. For the first time, he and I collaborated, creating a shared system to track family finances transparently. Sunday dinners resumed, but they rotated locations now. Sometimes at my condo, sometimes at Tyler's apartment, sometimes at our parents' house, which we all now acknowledged was legally mine, though I had no intention of displacing them. The conversations changed too. Dad asked for my advice about his retirement accounts rather than just expecting me to manage them. Mom invited me to help reorganize her sewing room, not as free labor but as a shared project between equals. 1. Sunday. As we finished dinner at my place, Dad cleared his throat in a way that once would have made me tense, anticipating some demand disguised as a request. "I've been thinking about the gutters," he said. "They need cleaning before fall. I'd like to split the cost of hiring someone with you, since it's technically your house now." The simple acknowledgement that the house was mine, that expenses should be shared, that he was asking rather than expecting, represented a fundamental shift in our relationship. "That sounds fair," I agreed. "I'll get some quotes this week." "Aunt?" As they left that evening, Mom hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Words I hadn't heard since my college graduation. A year after that pivotal Sunday dinner, I sat on my balcony, reviewing the family financial spreadsheet that had become our shared truth. Every payment, every contribution, every expense laid bare with no room for assumptions or unspoken expectations. My phone chimed with a text from Tyler. "Heading to Mom and Dad's to fix the garbage disposal. Want to split the cost of parts? I'll handle the labor if you buy lunch." I smiled at the easy collaboration that had once seemed impossible. We'd become partners of sorts, each contributing what we could. His time and physical skills, my financial stability and organizational talents. The deed to the house still bore my name, but it had evolved from a weapon into a symbol. Tangible proof that contributions matter, that responsibility should be recognized, that worth isn't always visible until it's withdrawn. I hadn't set out to teach my family a lesson. I'd simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. In doing so, I'd freed not just myself, but all of us from the imbalanced equations we'd been living by. The house keys sat on my table, no longer a burden, but a choice. I could go over any time, not because I was needed, but because I was wanted. The difference was everything. Sometimes the most valuable things we own aren't measured in square footage or dollar amounts, but in the courage to redraw boundaries that should have existed all along. In the end, I hadn't just secured my name on a deed. I'd claimed my rightful place in my own life story. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 2 from my father, and 2 from Tyler. I scrolled through them while sipping my coffee, a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in years, I felt no immediate urgency to respond, no reflexive need to solve whatever crisis had prompted this barrage. My phone buzzed again as I was getting ready for work. A text from Mom. "Internet still not working. Called the company, but they say account is not in our name. Please call when you get a chance." I finished applying my mascara, checked my appearance in the mirror, and left for the hospital without responding. The old Rebecca would have immediately called the internet provider, spent 45 minutes navigating their customer service maze, and set up a new account in her parents' name, probably still using her own credit card as backup payment. The new Rebecca simply drove to work, focusing on the patients who would actually appreciate her help today. My shift at Westlake Medical Center was particularly rewarding that day. I worked with Mrs. Abernathy, a 73-year-old recovering from a hip replacement who had just managed to walk 30 feet unassisted, a significant milestone in her recovery. Her daughter had brought flowers to celebrate, and Mrs. Abernathy insisted I take one, a bright yellow daffodil that I tucked into my badge holder. "You've changed something," Mrs. Abernathy said as I helped her back to her room. "Oh? New haircut, maybe?" I touched my hair self-consciously. She shook her head. "No, it's something else. You seem lighter somehow, like you've put down a heavy bag you've been carrying." I stared at her, startled by her perception. "That's actually very accurate." "Good for you," she said, patting my hand. "Some loads aren't ours to carry, no matter who tries to hand them to us." I thought about her words throughout the afternoon as I worked with other patients, each one dealing with their own recovery journey, their own process of rebuilding strength after vulnerability. Wasn't that what I was doing now? Recovering from years of carrying a weight that had bent me out of shape? When my shift ended, I checked my phone again. 4 more missed calls and a text from Tyler. Seriously, Beck, what the hell? The power. Company left a notice on the door. Are all the utilities in your name? Why didn't you ever say anything? I typed a simple response. Yes, they're in my name. I've been paying them for 3 years. Time for someone else to take a turn. His reply came almost instantly. But I can't afford all this. My promotion doesn't start until next month. I slipped my phone back into my pocket without responding. His financial limitations weren't my emergency. For once, I was putting myself first, a novel concept in the Mitchell family dynamic. That evening, I did something I'd never allowed myself before. I ordered takeout from the upscale Thai restaurant near my condo, the one I'd always considered too expensive for regular nights. I enjoyed green curry and coconut rice on my balcony, watching the sunset while classical music played softly in the background. No crisis calls interrupted my meal. No family emergency required my immediate attention. The world continued spinning without my constant intervention. The next day brought another round of increasingly frantic messages. Dad had called the mortgage company only to discover that the payment history showed my name on half the monthly transactions for the past 3 years. Mom had tried to reinstate the internet service but couldn't without paying the outstanding balance plus a reconnection fee, approximately $340 that she apparently didn't have readily available. "This isn't fair to your parents," Tyler texted. "They're too old to deal with all this stress." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. They weren't too old to make unilateral decisions about their estate. They weren't too old to dismiss my years of support. They were only too old when it came to facing the consequences of their choices. "They're in their early 60s and perfectly capable," I replied. "Dad still works full-time and Mom volunteers 3 days a week. They can manage their own bills like every other adult." The silence that followed my message was telling. The family script had always cast me as the problem solver, the responsible one who would step in before any real discomfort could be felt by the others. I had torn up that script, and no one knew their lines anymore. By Friday, a full week after, the Sunday dinner revelation, my parents' carefully constructed world was showing noticeable cracks. The power remained on, likely because the bill I'd paid last month covered the current period, but the internet was disconnected, the lawn service I'd arranged had stopped coming, and according to Tyler, the refrigerator was mysteriously leaking, with no one knowing who to call for repairs. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number for Anderson Appliance Repair, the service I'd used 3 times in the past 2 years for various household emergencies at my parents' home, and almost forwarded it to Tyler. Then I stopped myself. This was part of the pattern I was breaking, this reflexive need to solve, to fix, to make everything seamless for people who didn't even notice the effort. Instead, I deleted the draft message and opened my laptop, booking myself a weekend yoga retreat at a small resort in the mountains 2 hours away. The old Rebecca would never have spent $430 on herself for a non-essential experience. The old Rebecca would have put that money toward her parents' property taxes, or Tyler's car insurance, or some other family expense that somehow always became her responsibility. The new Rebecca packed a small bag, set her out-of-office email, response, and drove away from Mapleton early Saturday morning with the windows down and music playing. For the first time in memory, she spent a weekend completely disconnected from family obligations, family guilt, and family drama. The yoga retreat was transformative, not because of any particular spiritual revelation, but because of its stunning ordinariness. I took classes, hiked forest trails, ate healthy meals with strangers who knew nothing about me, and slept deeply without my phone on the nightstand, subconsciously listening for the ring that would signal another Mitchell family crisis requiring my immediate attention. By Sunday evening, when I returned to my condo, I felt more myself than I had in years. I had 16 missed calls, but the world had continued turning without my intervention. The revelation was both obvious and profound. I was not indispensable to their lives, just as they had shown me I was not indispensable to their future. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Tyler was waiting in the hospital parking lot when I arrived for my 7 a.m. shift, sitting on the hood of his car with 2 coffee cups beside him. He looked rumpled and tired, as if he hadn't slept. Well? "Peace offering?" he said, holding out one of the cups as I approached. I accepted it cautiously. "This is earlier than I've seen you conscious in years. What's going on?" "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Everything's a mess, Beck. The mortgage payment is officially late now. Dad got some notice about property insurance lapsing. Mom's stress cleaning everything in sight. And He trailed off, looking genuinely lost. "And you?" I prompted, sipping the coffee. It was exactly how I liked it, oat milk and a hint of cinnamon. I was surprised he remembered. "And I had no idea," he finished quietly. "About any of it. About what you've been doing for them, for us. I thought they were managing fine on their retirement and Dad's part-time work. I had no clue you were basically subsidizing their entire lifestyle." I leaned against the car next to him, the early morning sun warming my face. "Would it have mattered if you had known?" He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "I don't know," he finally said. "I'd like to think it would have, but honestly, I've been pretty self-absorbed." The simple acknowledgement, so unlike the defensive Tyler I'd known all my life, caught me off guard. That's surprisingly self-aware. "Yeah, well, nothing like watching your parents panic over basic bills to make you reevaluate some things." He took a gulp of his coffee. "How long have you been covering all this stuff?" 3 years for the utilities and property taxes. Almost 4 years for half the mortgage, plus random emergencies. The roof repair, the furnace replacement. Mom's dental work that insurance didn't fully cover. Tyler winced with each item I listed. "Jesus, Beck, that's tens of thousands of dollars." $74,826 to be exact, I said. "I've been keeping track." He nearly choked on his coffee. "Are you serious?" "I'm a very organized person, Tyler. I know exactly what I've contributed and what it's cost me, financially and otherwise." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might contain some solution to this situation. "I can't replace that kind of money, not even close." "I'm not asking you to." "Then what do you want? Because this Cold War is destroying them. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof, and Mom burst into tears yesterday when the internet company wanted a $600 deposit since their previous account showed as delinquent." I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the ingrained need to rush in and fix everything. I pushed it down firmly. What I want is acknowledgement, respect, equal treatment, not to be taken for granted while simultaneously being written out of the family's future. Tyler nodded slowly. "That's fair. And the will thing, it was messed up. I told them that after you left. I didn't ask for everything to be left to me. That was their idea." "But you didn't refuse it either," I pointed out. "No," he admitted. "I didn't. And I should have." We stood in silence for a few minutes, the hospital parking lot gradually filling with early shift workers. I needed to go in soon, or I'd be late for my first patient. "So what happens now?" Tyler finally asked. "They're drowning, Beck. And I'm barely keeping my own head above water with my expenses. I can't save them." "Maybe they need to learn how to swim," I suggested, finishing my coffee. "Or, at the very least, acknowledge who's been keeping them afloat all this time." I pushed off from the car, shouldering my work bag. "Thanks for the coffee. I've got to get to my patients." "Wait," Tyler called as I turned to leave. "Just tell me what to do here. How do we fix this?" I looked back at him, struck by how young he suddenly appeared. Like the little brother who used to ask me for help with his math homework before we grew into our assigned family roles of the golden child and the reliable one. Start by having an honest conversation with them, I said, about money, about expectations, about fairness. Then we can talk. I left him standing there, watching me walk into the hospital. For the first time in our adult relationship, I felt that Tyler was actually seeing me, not as his backup plan or safety net, but as someone whose contribution had value, whose absence created a void that couldn't be easily filled. The next 2 weeks brought a noticeable shift in the family dynamic. The frantic calls and texts slowed, replaced by more measured, respectful communication. Tyler sent me a spreadsheet, clearly his first attempt at creating one, given the formatting issues, showing what bills he could reasonably cover with his current salary and what remained problematic. Dad called, his voice lacking the authoritative tone I'd grown accustomed to, and asked if I would be willing to meet with them and discuss some options. Not demands, not expectations, but a request for discussion. A small but significant change in approach. I agreed to meet them the following weekend, suggesting a neutral location rather than their home or mine. We settled on a quiet cafe, downtown, the kind of place where our conversation could be private without the emotional weight of familiar surroundings. I arrived 15 minutes early, secured a table in the corner, and ordered a cappuccino to calm my nerves. Despite my newfound resolve, despite knowing I held both the moral and legal high ground, I couldn't quite shake the lifetime of conditioning that made confronting my parents feel somehow wrong. They arrived precisely on time, Mom looking more carefully put together than usual, Dad wearing what I recognized as his important meeting sweater, the navy blue cashmere my sister-in-law had given him 2 Christmases ago. Tyler came separately, sliding into the 4th chair just as the server was taking their drink orders. "You look well," Mom said after an awkward silence. "That color suits you." I glanced down at my emerald blouse, a recent purchase from a boutique I'd always admired but considered too expensive for practical Rebecca. "Thank you. How have you been?" "Managing," Dad replied, stirring his black coffee more vigorously than necessary. "It's been educational. These past few weeks." I nodded, waiting for more. The old Rebecca would have rushed to fill the silence, to smooth over the discomfort. The new Rebecca recognized the power in patience. "We've had to make some adjustments," Mom continued, when it became clear I wasn't going to rescue the conversation. "Canceled some subscriptions, returned to meal planning like we did when you kids were small." She laughed nervously. "I forgot how much I dislike budgeting." "It's an acquired skill," I acknowledged. "One I've been practicing for quite some time." Another silence fell, heavier this time. Tyler shifted in his seat, glancing between our parents and me like a spectator at a particularly tense tennis match. "Rebecca," Dad finally said, setting down his spoon with a soft clink against the saucer. "We owe you an apology." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of surprise. In 34 years, I could count on one hand the number of times Clayton Mitchell had explicitly apologized for anything. "We've taken advantage of your generosity," he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "For years, apparently. And then we made a decision about our estate that was thoughtless, hurtful." "Why?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me since that Sunday dinner. "Why would you cut me out so completely after everything I've done?" Mom looked down at her hands, twisted together on the table. "We never saw it that way. We thought we were being practical. You've always been so capable, so independent." Tyler seemed to need more support, more foundation. "You rewarded his irresponsibility and punished my reliability," I translated. Dad winced but didn't disagree. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." "How else would you put it?" He had no answer for that. Tyler cleared his throat. I've been going through their finances with them, he said, pulling out a more polished version of the spreadsheet he'd sent me earlier. Even with my help, they're about $800 short each month for basic expenses. And that's not counting any emergencies or unexpected costs. I glanced at the numbers. They were sobering but not surprising. I'd been covering that shortfall and more for years without complaint. The thing is, Tyler continued, looking distinctly uncomfortable, I can't make up that difference. Not consistently. Not with my current obligations. Which include, I noted, scanning the expense column of the spreadsheet, a luxury apartment, car payments on a vehicle well above your means, and what appears to be a significant monthly entertainment budget. Tyler flushed but didn't deny it. I'm willing to make some changes. Get a roommate maybe, trade in the car for something more practical. These are all very interesting realizations, I said, looking around at their expectant faces. But I'm still not clear on what you're proposing. Dad straightened in his chair, adopting the posture I recognized from my childhood when he was about to present what he considered a reasonable compromise. We've spoken with Harold. The will has been rewritten to split everything equally between you and Tyler. I've also agreed to contribute $300 monthly toward their expenses, Tyler added. It's what I can manage right now without completely overhauling my life, but I'm looking for ways to increase that. Mom reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of touching mine, recognizing perhaps that she no longer had the right to automatic physical connection. We're hoping you might consider helping again. Not everything, just enough to close the gap until we can make more permanent adjustments. Such as? I asked. We've listed the house with a realtor, Dad said, the admission clearly painful. For him. It's too big for us now anyway. Requires too much maintenance. We're looking at those senior living apartments on the west side. Lower monthly costs, no property taxes or maintenance fees. The revelation stunned me. My father, who had always declared he would leave his home feet first or not at all, was voluntarily downsizing. It represented a seismic shift in his self-identity, one I never thought I'd witness. That's a significant change, I acknowledged. We don't have much choice, Mom said quietly. The foreclosure notice was a wake-up call. Without your support, we simply can't maintain our current lifestyle. Tyler leaned forward. The thing is, Beck, they need a bridge. Just until the house sells and they can downsize. A few months at most. And I've agreed to match whatever you're willing to contribute going forward. I took a slow sip of my cappuccino, considering their proposal. On the surface, it appeared reasonable, a temporary continuation of my financial support, but with acknowledgement, with Tyler sharing the burden, with a clear end date in sight. But something still felt unresolved. And the deed? I asked, directing the question to my father. Are you aware that I'm the legal owner of the house you're planning to sell? The surprised expressions on their faces gave me my answer. Even after everything, they still hadn't bothered to thoroughly review their own financial situation, to understand the full extent of my involvement in their affairs. What are you talking about? Dad asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. When you refinanced the mortgage 4 years ago to cover your medical bills, you needed a cosigner because your credit score had dropped. Remember? The bank required someone with stronger credit and income stability. Mom nodded slowly. You co-signed the loan. We were grateful for that. I did more than co-sign, I corrected her. The bank required the title to be transferred into my name as part of the agreement. I am the legal owner of the house. I have been for 4 years. A stunned silence fell over the table. Tyler's mouth had actually dropped open slightly, and Dad looked as if someone had just told him the earth was flat. That's not possible, he finally said. We would have known. You signed the paperwork, I reminded him. I explained it at the time. But you were focused on getting the loan approved to cover your medical bills. You said, and I quote, "Whatever it takes to get this done, just tell me where to sign." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "So all this time, I've owned the house you live in," I confirmed. "I've been paying half the mortgage on a property that's legally mine, allowing you to live there while also covering most of your utilities and expenses, only to be told that I was being cut out of the will in favor of Tyler." The full weight of the situation finally seemed to land on them. Dad's face had paled to an alarming shade, and Mom looked close to tears. "What do you want to do?" Tyler asked after a long, tense silence. "Evict them?" "Of course not," I said, genuinely offended by the suggestion. "I could have done that weeks ago if that was my intention." "Then what do you want?" Dad asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It had never been. This was about recognition, respect, and rebalancing a family dynamic that had been skewed for far too long. "I want several things," I began. "First, complete transparency about the family finances from now on. No more hidden struggles, no more pretending everything's fine until it reaches crisis level." They nodded in unison. "Second, I want equal treatment. Not just in the will, but in everyday interactions. No more dismissing my accomplishments while celebrating Tyler's smallest efforts. Tyler had the grace to look ashamed at this. Third, I want acknowledgement, not just today in this crisis, but consistently, of my contributions to this family, financial and otherwise." "Of course," Mom murmured. "And finally," I continued, "I want us to establish a sustainable plan going forward. One that doesn't rely primarily on my resources, one that respects everyone's capabilities and limitations, and one that we all agree to follow." Dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between surprise and reluctant admiration. "When did you become so assertive?" "I've always been this person," I replied quietly. "You just never had to notice before." We spent the next hour working through the details of our new arrangement. I would continue covering a portion of their expenses, significantly reduced from before, for a maximum of 4 months, giving them time to sell the house and relocate to a more affordable living situation. Tyler would match my contribution dollar for dollar, requiring some immediate lifestyle adjustments on his part. The proceeds from the house sale would be managed transparently, with a portion set aside in a dedicated emergency fund to prevent future financial crises. Most importantly, we established a weekly family meeting to review finances, address any concerns, and ensure everyone remained aligned with our shared goals. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Mom reached for my hand again, this time making contact. Her fingers were cool against mine, slightly trembling. "I'm sorry," she said simply, her eyes meeting mine directly. "For taking you for granted, for not seeing you clearly." The apology, unexpected and unqualified, loosened something tight in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take more time. But the possibility of it, the foundation for rebuilding what had been broken. Dad stood awkwardly, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, he extended his hand to me, a formal gesture that nonetheless represented a shift in how he saw me, no longer just his daughter, but someone worthy of adult respect. "Thank you," he said gruffly, "for not giving up on us completely. We don't deserve your consideration after how we've acted." I took his hand, feeling calluses that spoke of decades of hard work, of a man who had always done his best according to his understanding of what that meant. "Family is complicated," I said. "We're all learning." Tyler hung back as our parents headed toward their car, waiting until they were out of earshot before turning to me. "I had no idea, Beck, about any of it. The money, the deed, how much you've been carrying all this time." I know. Why didn't you ever say anything? I considered the question, trying to articulate something I'd never fully examined myself. I think I was caught in a loop. The more I did without acknowledgement, the more I felt I needed to do to earn recognition. It became this strange competition with myself. Surely, if I just did enough, they would finally see me. He nodded, slowly, and I was the opposite. The less that was expected of me, the less I felt obligated to contribute. Why bother when Rebecca will handle everything anyway? Quite the dysfunctional system we had going. Had, he repeated, emphasizing the past tense. Things are different now. I looked at my younger brother, really looked at him, perhaps, for the first time in years. Behind the privileged attitude and careless charm was someone capable of growth, of acknowledging mistakes, of changing course when confronted with the consequences of his choices. Yes, I agreed. They are. As I drove home from the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years, unburdened by the weight of unacknowledged sacrifices and unbalanced expectations. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where all hurts were magically healed, all past injustices forgotten. It was messier than that, more complicated, more human. My parents would need to downsize, to adjust to a more modest lifestyle aligned with their actual resources. Tyler would need to grow up financially, to learn the adulting skills he'd been sheltered from for too long. And I would need to learn a new way of relating to my family, not as their safety net or invisible support system, but as an equal partner in our shared journey. The deed to the house that had been my unexpected leverage would eventually transfer with the sale, converting to financial assets that would benefit all of us, according to our new agreement. But the true deed, the recognition of my worth, my voice, my place in the family, that had already been transferred and its value was immeasurable. When I reached my condo, I found a small package leaning against my door, a slender box wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a house key on a silver keychain engraved with a single word, equals. There was no note, no explanation needed. Tyler, in his own way, was acknowledging that the home he had always taken for granted had never truly belonged to him in the first place. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one, the first step in a long process of rebalancing. I placed the keychain on my entryway table, a tangible reminder that sometimes reclaiming your worth requires letting others feel the weight of your absence. Even when every instinct tells you to rush in, fix everything, make it all seamless, again. The path forward wouldn't be perfect. Old habits rarely die easily, and we would all likely stumble as we learned new ways of relating to each other. But for the first time, we were walking that path with open eyes, with shared understanding, with the truth laid bare between us. And that, I realized, was the most valuable deed of all. 2 months after our meeting at the cafe, the for sale sign in front of my parents' house gained a bright red sold sticker across its face. The property had moved surprisingly quickly, snapped up by a young family eager to put down roots in the established Mapleton neighborhood. The selling price exceeded our expectations, providing my parents with a comfortable financial cushion as they transitioned to their new life. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the sign with mixed emotions. This house had been the center of our family universe for over 30 years. I'd scraped my knees on that driveway, practiced driving in that cul-de-sac, returned to that front door during college breaks and adult crises alike. Yet I felt strangely unburdened by its impending loss, as if the physical structure had come to represent the unbalanced family dynamic I was finally breaking free from. Weird, isn't it? Tyler's voice came from behind me. He was dressed in work clothes, actually work clothes, not the business casual attire of his tech job, but a faded t-shirt and jeans stained with paint. He'd been helping our parents prepare the house for the final walkthrough. Very, I agreed, turning to face him. How are they doing? Mom keeps finding reasons to go into the attic just one more time to make sure nothing important was left behind. Dad's been unusually quiet, measuring everything in the new apartment like he's planning to rebuild the house in miniature. I nodded, unsurprised. Change was difficult at any age, but especially for two people who had clung to the illusion of stability while their financial foundation crumbled beneath them. "And you?" I asked. "How's the roommate situation working out?" Tyler grimaced. "Jason's not exactly a neat freak, but the rent reduction makes up for finding his socks in the living room, and trading in the Audi for a 3-year-old Honda was actually liberating? Is that weird to say?" "Not weird at all," I said, thinking of the weight I'd shed by stepping back from my role as the family's financial safety net. Sometimes having less is having more. We walked together toward the house, where boxes were stacked in neat piles according to destination. Apartment, storage, donation center. The moving truck would arrive tomorrow, marking the final transition from the life they'd been unable to sustain to one that reflected their actual means. Mom was in the kitchen, wrapping her prized collection of decorative plates in newspaper. She looked up as we entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "The real estate agent called," she said, securing another plate in bubble wrap. "The new owners want to know if the window treatments in the master bedroom convey with the house." "They're included," I confirmed. "It was in the contract." She nodded absently, returning to her task with deliberate focus. I recognized the coping mechanism, controlling what little she could in the midst of overwhelming change. Dad appeared from the hallway, carrying a box labeled "Important Papers" in his blocky handwriting. He set it on the kitchen counter with a heavy sigh. "Found another stash of financial statements in the back of the filing cabinet," he said. "Some going back to 2003. Don't know why I kept all this stuff." "Better safe than sorry was always your motto," Mom replied without looking up from her wrapping. "Lot of good it did us," he muttered, then caught my eye and straightened. "Rebecca, could you take a look at these lease documents for the apartment? Something about the maintenance clause seems odd to me." The request was delivered casually, but I recognized it for what it was. A genuine acknowledgement of my expertise, not the automatic delegation of responsibility that had characterized our relationship for so long. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. "Sure," I said, accepting the folder he extended. "I'll review it tonight and let you know if I see any red flags." We worked together through the afternoon, sorting through 3 decades of accumulated possessions. The process was emotionally draining but cathartic, each decision a small step toward their new reality. Tyler surprised me with his patience, carefully cataloging Dad's tool collection and helping Mom determine which kitchen appliances would fit in their downsized space. By evening, we'd made significant progress, though the house still looked more lived in than move-out ready. Tyler ordered pizza, and we gathered around the kitchen island, the dining table having already been disassembled and stored in the garage. "To new beginnings," Tyler proposed, raising his paper cup of soda in an impromptu toast. Mom managed a small smile. "And to good endings. This house served us well." "It sheltered our family through a lot," Dad agreed, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. Then glancing at me, he added, "Though apparently we didn't always understand who was really keeping the roof over our heads." The acknowledgement, though tinged with self-deprecation, represented a significant shift in his perspective. The Clayton Mitchell I'd grown up with would never have admitted such a fundamental misunderstanding, especially not in front of both his children. "We're learning," I said simply, echoing the sentiment I'd expressed at the cafe. "All of us." After dinner, as Tyler helped Dad move the last of the bookshelves to the garage, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She handed me a small wooden box I recognized immediately, the antique jewelry case that had belonged to her grandmother. "I want you to have this now," she said quietly. "Not after I'm gone. Not as part of some impersonal estate distribution. Now, while I can see you receive it." I opened the box carefully. Inside lay her pearl necklace, the one she'd worn at her wedding, The one she'd lent me for my college graduation, the one she'd always said would be passed down when the time was right. "Mom, this should stay with you. You still wear these." She shook her head. "I've been saving too many things for someday while overlooking what's right in front of me today. That's a pattern I'm trying to break." She closed my fingers around the box. "I want you to have this as a reminder that I see you, even when I've been terrible at showing it." The gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It wasn't about the monetary value of the pearls, modest at best, but about the recognition they represented. For the first time, my mother was offering inheritance as an act of appreciation rather than obligation, giving freely rather than withholding. Conditionally. "Thank you," I said, embracing her briefly. "I'll treasure them." The following day brought the controlled chaos of moving day. The truck arrived promptly at 8, followed by the professional movers I'd insisted on hiring despite Dad's initial protests about the expense. "We can handle it ourselves," had been his reflexive response, until I pointed out that neither his back nor his pride would survive the alternative. By mid-afternoon, the house stood empty except for the echo of footsteps and memories. Mom walked through each room one final time, trailing her fingers along walls now stripped of family photos. Dad checked closets and cabinets with mechanical precision, his expression unreadable. Tyler and I waited on the front porch, giving them space for their private goodbyes. "I never thought they'd actually leave," Tyler admitted, sitting on the steps beside me. "Dad always said he'd die in this house." "Plans change when reality intrudes," I pointed out. "They couldn't afford to stay." "Because I wasn't contributing enough," he said, the self-awareness still new enough to sound strange in his voice. "And because they made decisions without understanding their own finances." "It wasn't entirely your fault," I found myself saying, surprised by my own generosity of spirit. "The pattern was established long before you could have changed it. We all played our assigned roles." He nodded thoughtfully, still trying to figure out what my new role is supposed to be. "I think that's the point. We're not supposed to be playing roles for each other anymore. Just trying to be authentic and responsible adults who happen to be related." The front door opened behind us, and our parents emerged, Mom dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Dad clutching the house keys that would soon be handed over to the new owners. "That's that then," he said with forced casualness that fooled no one. "Time to start the next chapter." I stood, offering my hand to help Tyler up from the steps. "I'll follow you to the apartment. Make sure everything arrives in one piece." Dad started to nod automatically, then paused. "You don't have to do that, Rebecca. You've done more than enough already. If you have other plans—" "I want to," I interrupted gently. "Not because I have to, but because I choose to be there for this transition. There's a difference." The relief on his face was evident, though he tried to mask it with a gruff nod. "Well, we'd appreciate the company then." We divided into our respective vehicles, Dad and Mom in their recently downsized single car, the second having been sold as part of their financial restructuring, Tyler in his practical Honda, and me in my reliable Subaru. As we pulled away, from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the house that had defined our family for so long. It looked strangely diminished without us, just a structure waiting for new stories to unfold within its walls. The apartment complex was a modern, two-story building specifically designed for active seniors, not quite assisted living, but offering amenities that made life simpler for its residents. Their new home was a two-bedroom unit on the ground floor, with a small patio overlooking a well-maintained community garden. Mom had initially resisted the move, viewing it as an admission of defeat or decline. But as we began unloading their carefully curated possessions into the new space, I watched her expression shift from resigned acceptance to cautious optimism. "The light in here is wonderful," she observed, arranging a small collection of houseplants on the kitchen windowsill. Much better than that dark corner in the old house. And look at the size of this pantry. So much more practical than those high cabinets I could never reach without a step stool. Dad was in the bedroom, meticulously, reconstructing their bed frame with the precision of a man who had spent decades taking things apart and putting them back together. He'd been quieter throughout the move, processing the change in his own way. "Need any help in here?" I asked from the doorway. He glanced up, then returned to tightening a bolt. "Almost finished. Your brother already tried to help and nearly stripped the threads on 2 of these bolts. Better if I just handle it myself." I smiled, recognizing the familiar independence that had always characterized my father. Some things hadn't changed, despite our new family dynamic. "Fair enough. I'll help Mom with the kitchen unpacking." As I turned to leave, he cleared his throat. "Rebecca?" I paused, looking back. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. The movers, the apartment hunting, the patience. I know we haven't made any of this easy." The acknowledgement, delivered without qualifiers or excuses, represented a seismic shift in our relationship. Clayton Mitchell didn't thank people for helping him. He either expected assistance as his due or rejected it as unnecessary to his self-sufficiency. "You're welcome," I replied, equally simply. No minimizing, no reflexive, it's nothing to diminish the significance of my contributions. Another small victory in the ongoing recalibration of our family balance. By evening, enough had been unpacked to make the apartment functional, if not fully settled. Tyler ordered takeout again, his new default contribution to family gatherings, and we ate at the small dining table that fit perfectly in the apartment's efficient layout. "It feels strange not having a second floor," Mom commented, looking up at the ceiling. "I keep thinking I should be checking upstairs to make sure all the windows are closed." "One-level living has its advantages," I pointed out. "No stairs, to navigate as you get older." "We're not ancient yet," Dad grumbled, but without real heat. Though my knees appreciated the elevator for bringing up those boxes. The conversation meandered comfortably, touching on practical matters like updating address information and the apartment complex's maintenance procedures. It felt strangely normal, a family discussing everyday logistics without the undercurrent of unacknowledged resentments and imbalanced expectations that had characterized our interactions for so long. As Tyler and I prepared to leave, Mom pressed a small bag of leftover cookies into my hands. "For your breakfast tomorrow. I know you don't always take time to eat properly when you have early shifts." The gesture was familiar. Mom had always shown affection through food, but the absence of accompanying criticism made it newly meaningful. No commentary about my workaholic tendencies, no subtle suggestion that I might attract more suitors if I spent less time at the hospital, and more time on my appearance. Just a simple act of motherly care, offered without agenda. "Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it." In the parking lot, Tyler lingered by my car, keys jingling in his hand as if he was uncertain about something. "Everything okay?" I asked, unlocking my door. "Yeah, just..." He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I've been thinking about what you said about roles and authenticity. I think my authentic self might be considering a career change." This was unexpected. Tyler had always defined himself through prestigious-sounding job titles and the external trappings of success, regardless of whether the reality matched the image he projected. What kind of change? He leaned against my car, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. "You know I've been helping with the community garden at Jason's church, right? Just volunteer stuff on weekends." I nodded. This was a recent development, part of his post-will revelation attempts at personal growth. "There's this urban agriculture program at the community college, teaching people to grow food in city environments, working with community organizations to create sustainable local food systems." His words came faster now, enthusiasm breaking through his usual calculated cool. "I could finish the certification In a year, and they have connections with nonprofit organizations throughout the region. That sounds... I searched for the right word, aware of how significant my response might be in this rare moment of genuine Tyler vulnerability. Fulfilling and meaningful. It's a pay cut, he admitted. Significant one, at least initially. But I'm so tired of marketing meaningless products to people who don't need them. I want to build something real. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't another of Tyler's superficial enthusiasms, destined to fade when the next shiny opportunity presented itself. This was something deeper, perhaps the first authentic vocational calling he'd experienced. I think you should explore it, I said. You seem more animated talking about community gardens than I've ever seen you discussing client experience, metrics. He laughed, the sound surprisingly free of self-consciousness. Yeah, well, even I wasn't entirely sure what those metrics actually measured. He straightened, suddenly serious again. I'm going to an information session next week. Would you want to come with me? Give me your thoughts? The request stunned me. Tyler had never voluntarily included me in any decision-making process, let alone something as significant as a career change. Our relationship had been defined by parallel lives that intersected only at obligatory family functions, not by active collaboration or genuine interest in each other's pursuits. I'd be happy to, I said, meaning it. Just let me know when and where. His relief was palpable. Thanks, Beck. I value your opinion, even if I've been terrible at showing it. As I drove home that evening, I marveled at how much had changed in the span of a few months. My parents, downsized but dignified, learning to live within their actual means. Tyler, contemplating a future defined by contribution rather than consumption. And me, no longer the invisible support beam holding everything together, but an acknowledged and essential part of our reconstructed family architecture. The following weeks brought a new routine. Sunday dinners continued, but now rotated between locations, sometimes at my condo, sometimes at Tyler's apartment, tidier now with the influence of his surprisingly fastidious roommate, sometimes at our parents' new place. The conversations had shifted too, becoming more balanced, more authentic, less defined by unspoken hierarchies of family value. I accompanied Tyler to the information session at the community college, watching with growing respect as he asked thoughtful questions and engaged earnestly with the program coordinators. This version of my brother, passionate about something, beyond his own advancement, willing to consider a path with more meaning than money, was someone I could genuinely like, not just tolerate out of family obligation. Dad called me one evening with a question about their new internet setup, and after resolving the technical issue, surprised me by asking about my work at the hospital. That new rehabilitation program you mentioned a while back, the one for stroke patients, how's that coming along? The fact that he'd remembered, that he was asking with what seemed like genuine interest rather than perfunctory politeness, felt like a small miracle. It's going well, I said, settling onto my couch for a real conversation rather than the rushed problem-solving our calls had traditionally involved. We've got 12 patients enrolled now, and the preliminary outcomes are encouraging. That must be satisfying work, he commented, seeing people regain abilities they thought they'd lost. It is. Every bit of progress feels significant, even when it's just someone being able to hold a spoon steadily enough to feed themselves again. Your mother and I are proud of you, he said, the words delivered with uncharacteristic directness. I don't think we've said that enough over the years, but the work you do matters. The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion welling up. How long had I waited to hear those words from him? How many achievements had passed with minimal recognition while Tyler's lesser accomplishments were celebrated lavishly? Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. There was a brief silence, Then he cleared his throat. Your brother tells me you're helping him research that urban agriculture program. Just providing moral support, really. He's doing the heavy lifting. Well, it's good to see you two working together on something, supporting each other. Another pause. I think your mother and I might have encouraged certain dynamics between you that weren't particularly healthy. The understatement was so profound it almost made me laugh. You think? His chuckle surprised me, self-deprecating and genuine. Fair point. We definitely did, and I'm sorry for that. 2 apologies in 1 conversation. From Clayton Mitchell. The world truly was changing. We're finding our way to something better, I said, echoing the theme that had become something of a family mantra over the past months. All of us. The true test of our new family dynamic came unexpectedly, 3 months after my parents' move. Mom called one Saturday morning, her voice tight with anxiety. Your father fell in the bathroom. Nothing broken, thank goodness, but he hit his head on the sink. The doctor says it's a mild concussion, nothing too serious, but they want someone to monitor him for the next 24 hours. My stomach tightened with the familiar weight of impending responsibility. This was exactly the kind of situation that would typically fall entirely on my shoulders. Dad needing care, Mom overwhelmed, Tyler conveniently unavailable. I can be there in 30 minutes, I said automatically, already mentally rescheduling my weekend plans. Actually, Mom said, surprising me, I've already called Tyler. He's on his way here now and he's going to take the first shift. I thought, maybe you could relieve him this evening? We're trying to work out a rotation so no one person has to handle everything. The consideration, so contrary to their traditional approach of call Rebecca first, last, and exclusively, left me momentarily speechless. Rebecca, is that all right? If you have plans, we can figure something else out. Your father's okay, really, just needs watching. No, that's perfect, I managed, still processing this unprecedented distribution of family responsibility. I can come over around 6, stay the night if needed. Thank you, honey. Tyler said he'd bring dinner for everyone when you arrive, and I've already called the pharmacy about your father's prescriptions, so no need to worry about that. When I arrived that evening, I found Tyler already settled in, having organized Dad's medications, helped Mom clean up the bathroom where the fall had occurred, and set up a comfortable monitoring station in the living room complete with Dad's favorite recliner and a selection of films from his beloved Western collection. How is he? I asked, setting down my overnight bag. Grumpy about being fussed over, Tyler replied with a smile, but otherwise stable. No vomiting, pupils equal and reactive, oriented to time and place. At my surprised look, he added, I researched concussion monitoring protocols online, figured it was better to be prepared. The Tyler of 6 months ago would have shown up late, if at all, contributed nothing of substance, and left early with a flimsy excuse about prior commitments. This Tyler had not only arrived promptly, but had educated himself about proper care procedures and taken genuine initiative. Dad dozed in the recliner while Mom, Tyler, and I ate the dinner Tyler had brought, a healthy meal from the Mediterranean restaurant near his apartment, not the fast food that had been his default contribution in the past. I've been thinking, Mom said as we finished eating, we should probably look into one of those medical alert systems, just in case something like this happens when we're alone. Good idea, I agreed, relieved that she was thinking proactively rather than reactively. There are several options now, including some that don't require wearing a pendant if Dad's resistant to that idea. Already looked into those too, Tyler said, pulling out his phone. I've got information on 3 different services with their pros and cons. Thought we could review them together and decide what works best. Mom looked between us with a small, sad smile. We've put so much on Rebecca for so long. It's nice to see the burden being shared properly. It's not a burden when it's distributed fairly, I said, realizing the truth of the words as I spoke them. It's just family taking care of each other. As evening progressed into night, Tyler prepared to leave, having completed his shift of concussion monitoring. At the door, he hesitated, then pulled me into an unexpected hug. "Thanks for not giving up on me," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be better." "I see that," I assured him, "and I appreciate it more than you know." That night, as I sat in the dimly lit living room watching Dad sleep, periodically waking him for the neurological checks the doctor had recommended, I reflected on the strange journey the past months had represented. We hadn't magically transformed into a perfect family. We still had moments of friction, old patterns that occasionally resurfaced, wounds that were healing but not yet fully scarred over. But we were learning a new way of being together, one based on mutual respect rather than default expectations, on balanced contribution rather than lopsided sacrifice, on seeing each other clearly rather than through the distorted lens of long-standing family roles. The deed to the house that had once been the center of our family life had transferred to the new owners, the sale proceeds carefully allocated according to our agreed-upon plan. But the true transfer, of respect, of recognition, of balanced responsibility, that was still ongoing, a daily practice rather than a single transaction. Dad stirred in the recliner, blinking awake during one of his scheduled checks. "Rebecca, what time is it?" "Just after 2 a.m., I told him, gently, checking his pupils with the small pen light the hospital had provided. "How are you feeling?" "Like an old fool who should have used the grab bar we installed specifically to prevent falls," he muttered, then added more seriously, "I'm sorry for disrupting your weekend." "It's okay, Dad. That's what family does. Shows up for each other." He reached out, his hand finding mine in the dim light. "We haven't always shown up properly for you, have we?" "You're learning," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "We all are." As he drifted back to sleep, I remained beside him, maintaining my vigil not out of obligation or resentment, but from a place of freely given care. The deed to this moment, to this new iteration of our family, was one we all held jointly now, each of us contributing to its value, each of us benefiting from its rewards. And that made all the difference. A year had passed since that fateful Sunday dinner. Seasons had changed, both literally and figuratively, as autumn once again painted Mapleton in rich golds and deep reds. I sat at an outdoor cafe, watching leaves spiral down from nearby trees, waiting for my family to arrive for what had become our monthly financial review session, a practice that had evolved from obligation to something approaching genuine collaboration. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Running 10 min late. Farmer's market delivery took longer than expected. Sorry." I smiled, still adjusting to this new version of my brother, who not only acknowledged his tardiness, but offered an actual explanation rather than an excuse. His urban agriculture program had evolved from tentative interest to passionate commitment. He'd completed his certification and now coordinated a network of community gardens that provided fresh produce to local food banks and senior centers, including the complex where our parents now lived. The change in Tyler went beyond his professional pivot. There was a groundedness to him now, a quiet satisfaction that had replaced his previous restless striving for external validation. His apartment was more modest, the luxury high-rise traded for a smaller place closer to his community gardens, but he seemed more at home in his own skin. "Rebecca!" I looked up to see my parents approaching, Dad leaning slightly on a walking cane, a concession to balance issues following a second minor fall 3 months after the concussion incident. He'd resisted the cane initially, viewing it as a sign of weakness or decline, but had gradually come to appreciate the security it provided. "We're not late, are we?" Mom asked, checking her watch as they reached my table. "I told your father we should have left 10 minutes earlier. but he insisted on watering those tomato plants Tyler brought over. "You're right on time," I assured her. Tyler's the one running behind. Something about a farmer's market delivery. Dad lowered himself carefully into a chair, positioning his cane against the table edge. Those cherry tomatoes needed attention. First frost predicted this weekend. He settled himself, then added with a hint of pride, "Besides, I'm the one who taught your brother about proper watering techniques. Can't let my protege down." The casual comment revealed volumes about how our family dynamic had evolved. Dad, who had once viewed Tyler exclusively as the golden child destined for corporate success, now took genuine pride in mentoring him in practical skills. Tyler, who had once dismissed such knowledge as beneath his aspirations, now sought out Dad's lifetime of hands-on experience. Mom pulled out a folder containing their monthly budget worksheet, a system we'd developed together during their transition to the apartment. "I've updated everything through last week. The utility costs were actually lower than we projected." "Efficient appliances," Dad noted. "And that programmable thermostat Tyler installed is making a difference." I accepted the folder, noting the meticulous organization that had replaced their previous financial chaos. "How's the emergency fund looking?" "Growing steadily," Mom reported with evident satisfaction. "We added another $100 this month from what we saved on utilities. Almost at our 6-month target now." The contrast between this conversation and our financial discussions a year ago couldn't have been more stark. Then, they had been in denial about their precarious situation, resistant to acknowledging reality, dependent on my invisible support. Now, they took genuine ownership of their circumstances, working within their means rather than beyond them, finding satisfaction in steady progress rather than unsustainable appearances. Tyler arrived in a rush of autumn air and apologies, his hands bearing a cardboard tray of coffee cups. Sorry, but I come bearing gifts. Pumpkin spice for Mom, black with 1 sugar for Dad, and that vanilla chai you like, Beck." He distributed the drinks with a flourish, then pulled out the 4th chair and collapsed into it dramatically. "Farmer's market was crazy today. Mrs. Hernandez's zucchini practically caused a riot. 3 families fighting over the last of the season's crop. Neighborhood vegetable violence," I commented dryly. "Sounds serious." "Mock all you want, but food security is no joke," Tyler replied, though his tone remained light. "Half our senior center clients rely on those deliveries to supplement what they can afford at grocery stores." Dad nodded approvingly. "Your brother's doing good work. Real work that helps real people." The unqualified praise, once reserved exclusively for Tyler's corporate achievements, no matter how vaguely defined, now flowed naturally for his more modest but meaningful contributions. Another subtle shift in our family's center of gravity. We moved through our monthly financial review with practiced efficiency, each of us playing our part in maintaining the careful balance we'd established. Mom and Dad shared updates on their household management. Tyler reported on his limited but consistent financial contributions to their needs, and I monitored the investment portfolio we'd established with the proceeds from the house sale. The Physical Therapy Center called yesterday, Mom mentioned as we were wrapping up. They had a cancellation and can take your father for an evaluation next week, instead of waiting until November. I glanced at Dad, expecting resistance. He'd been reluctant to pursue formal therapy for his increasing mobility issues, viewing it as an admission of frailty. "Already put it on my calendar," he said, surprising me. "Figured it's better to address these balance problems before they get worse." He tapped his cane lightly against the floor. "Don't particularly enjoy falling, as it turns out." "I can drive you," I offered automatically, then caught myself. "Unless you've already made arrangements?" "Tyler's taking me," Dad replied. His schedule's more flexible with the gardens winding down for winter. Another small miracle. Dad accepting help without resistance. the responsibility distributed naturally between his children rather than defaulting entirely to me. These changes, incremental but significant, continued to surprise me even a year into our recalibrated family dynamic. As we gathered our belongings at the end of our meeting, Mom hesitated, then said, "We were thinking of hosting Thanksgiving this year, at the apartment." The suggestion hung in the air, weighted with unspoken significance. Thanksgiving had always been held at the house, Mom presiding over elaborate meals in the formal dining room that could accommodate extended family and the occasional friend. The apartment's modest dimensions couldn't possibly replicate that tradition. "It would be small," she continued when no one immediately responded. "Just the four of us. But I think we could manage it if we're creative with the space." "That sounds wonderful," I said, recognizing the courage it took for her to offer this scaled-down version of a cherished tradition. "I can bring some folding chairs from the community center," Tyler added, "and maybe we could set up the food buffet style on the kitchen counter to save table space." Dad cleared his throat. "It won't be like the old days, but then again, neither are we. Might as well embrace the change." The simple acceptance, from the man who had once clung so desperately to the appearance of prosperity, who had measured his worth by the square footage of his home and the impressiveness of his possessions, revealed how profound his transformation had been. "Different doesn't mean worse," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Just different." He nodded, a small smile softening the lines of his face. Sometimes different is better. Took me too long to figure that out. As Tyler and I walked our parents to their car, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The air held that particular autumn crispness that always made me think of new beginnings, despite the season's association with endings and dormancy. "I almost forgot," Mom said, pausing before getting into the passenger seat. "Rebecca, Harold Bergman called yesterday. Something about needing updated contact information for the trust documentation. He said he'd tried your number but couldn't get through." "I'll call him this afternoon," I promised, making a mental note to check my contact information with our family lawyer. The trust we'd established with the house sale proceeds had been another step in our family's financial restructuring, designed to provide long-term security for our parents while protecting Tyler's and my eventual inheritance from potential healthcare costs or other late-life expenses. Tyler lingered after our parents drove away, hands thrust deep in the pockets of his jacket. "Want to grab dinner later this week? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Everything okay?" I asked, noting the unusual seriousness in his expression. "Yeah, just ideas percolating. Professional stuff I could use your perspective on." I couldn't help but marvel at this evolution, my brother actively seeking my input rather than dismissing my perspective. "Thursday works for me. That new Vietnamese place near your apartment? Perfect. My treat this time," he added with a grin. Perks of working for a nonprofit. I'm still broke, but at least now it's for a noble cause. As we parted ways, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly all our lives had changed in the span of a year. It hadn't been a smooth transformation. There had been setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, times when the weight of decades of dysfunctional family dynamics seemed too ingrained to truly overcome. Yet here, we were, navigating a new reality characterized not by perfect harmony, but by something perhaps more valuable: authentic engagement, balanced responsibility, and mutual respect. The deed to the family home that had once symbolized my invisible contributions and their casual dismissal had transferred to new owners months ago. But the true deed, the recognition of each person's value and place in our family structure, continued to strengthen with each passing season. Thursday evening found me at Saigon Kitchen, a cozy restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop in Tyler's eclectic neighborhood. He was already seated at a corner table. When I arrived, studying something on his tablet with unusual concentration, Strategic community garden planning? I asked, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up with a start, then powered off the screen. Something like that. Thanks for coming. We ordered, po for me, bun thit nuong for Tyler. And settled into the comfortable rhythm of siblings who were learning, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, how to actually enjoy each other's company. So, I prompted after our drinks arrived, what's this professional perspective you're seeking? Tyler took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders slightly as if preparing for a significant announcement. I've been offered a position, Program, Director for Urban Agriculture Initiatives with the Regional Food Security Alliance. Tyler, that's fantastic, I exclaimed, genuinely impressed. The Alliance was a well-respected organization that coordinated food access programs across 3 counties. It would be a perfect fit for your background. It would be a step up from what I'm doing now, he agreed. More responsibility, broader impact, working with city planners and policymakers to integrate urban agriculture into municipal development plans. Sounds like an amazing opportunity. He nodded, then hesitated. It would also mean more stability, regular hours, benefits, retirement, plan, all the grown-up stuff I've been avoiding for most of my adult life. I smiled at his self-deprecating assessment. The horror of actual adulthood. However will you cope? That's just it, he said, his expression turning serious. I think I'm ready for it. Not just the job itself, but what it represents. Building something lasting, contributing to solutions rather than just consuming resources. The transformation in his perspective was remarkable. Tyler, who had once defined success exclusively through material acquisition and status symbols, was now finding purpose in service and sustainability. I'm proud of you, I said simply. You've found a path with real meaning. He looked momentarily startled by the direct praise, then smiled. Thanks, Beck. That actually means a lot, coming from you. Our food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation as we organized garnishes and condiments. As we ate, Tyler gradually circled back to the reason for our dinner. The thing is, if I take this position, I'd have more consistent income. Enough to increase my contribution to Mom and Dad's expenses. He swirled noodles thoughtfully in his bowl. I've been thinking it might be time to rebalance our arrangement. Me taking on more financial responsibility. Maybe you scaling back a bit. I set down my spoon, genuinely surprised. This was not what I had expected when he mentioned needing my perspective. You're volunteering to take on more of the financial support? Don't look so shocked, he said with a flash of his old defensiveness, then visibly relaxed. Okay, yeah, it's a fair reaction given my track record. But I've been thinking a lot about equity lately, not just in food systems, but in our family. Go on, I encouraged, intrigued by this unexpected direction. You've been carrying the heaviest load for years, decades really. Even now with our new arrangements, you're still contributing more than I am, both financially and in terms of time and attention. He met my eyes directly. It's not fair, and I want to change it. The simple acknowledgement of the imbalance, of the inequity, of his desire to rectify it, felt more significant than any material adjustment could have been. I appreciate that, Tyler. Really. So you'll consider it? Letting me take on more responsibility? I smiled, recognizing the irony of the situation. After years of struggling to get my family to acknowledge my contributions, I now found myself hesitant to relinquish some of that responsibility. It might take some getting used to. I've been in fix-it mode for so long that it's become part of my identity. Tell me about it, he said with unexpected insight. I'm still unlearning being the family screw-up who needs constant bailing out. You were never just that, I objected automatically. Maybe not, but it was a role I played pretty convincingly. He pushed his empty bowl aside. We all got trapped in these family narratives that stopped serving us a long time ago, if they Ever did. You as the responsible one who handles everything. Me as the charming underachiever who gets away with everything. Dad as the unquestionable authority. Mom as the peacekeeper who never rocks the boat. The accuracy of his assessment startled me. When had my little brother developed such emotional intelligence? That's surprisingly insightful. Therapy, he admitted with a self-deprecating shrug. Turns out getting called out on your crap by family members you've taken for granted prompts some self-reflection. Who knew? I laughed, both at his delivery and at the realization that Tyler, forever resistant to advice or criticism, had voluntarily sought professional guidance to address his patterns. So therapy is helping? It's clarifying. Uncomfortable as hell sometimes, but clarifying. He signaled for the check, then continued. Which brings me back to my original point. I'm ready to step up more, and I think it might be healthy for you to step back a bit. Not because you can't handle it all, we both know you can, but because you shouldn't have to. As we left the restaurant and stood in the crisp evening air, I found myself genuinely considering his proposal. Not just the practical aspects of rebalancing our financial contributions to our parents' care, but the deeper implications of shifting our long-standing family roles. I'll think about it, I promised. We can discuss the details at next month's family meeting. Tyler nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. As we prepared to part ways, he surprised me with a quick, slightly awkward hug. Thanks for not giving up on me, Beck, even when I probably deserved it. The gesture, so unlike the performative affection of our previous family interactions, felt genuine and earned. That's what family is supposed to be, I replied. People who don't give up on each other, even when it's challenging. We're getting better at it, he observed, slowly but surely. The following week brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Harold Bergman, our family lawyer, requested a meeting to discuss what he described as an important update regarding your parents' estate planning. Given our history with such discussions, I approached the appointment with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Harold's office remained unchanged from my last visit, the same leather-bound law books lining the walls, the same slightly worn oriental rug beneath heavy wooden furniture, the same faint scent of lemon polish and aged paper. It was oddly comforting, this pocket of constancy in a year defined by transformation. Rebecca, thank you for coming, Harold greeted me, rising from behind his imposing desk. Though well into his 70s, he maintained the precise diction and formal demeanor that had characterized his legal practice for decades. Your parents and brother should be arriving shortly. This involves all of us? I asked, my curiosity deepening. Indeed, your parents were quite specific about wanting the entire family present for this discussion. Before I could inquire further, the office door opened to admit my family. Dad moving carefully with his cane, Mom fussing over his pace, Tyler bringing up the rear with an expression that suggested he was equally in the dark about the purpose of this gathering. Once we were all seated, Mom and Dad in the client chairs, Tyler and I in additional seating Harold had arranged along the wall, the lawyer adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat ceremoniously. I've asked you all here today at Clayton and Judith's request, he began, nodding toward my parents. They have made some significant decisions regarding their estate planning that they wish to communicate to both of you in my presence to ensure complete clarity and transparency. I glanced at Tyler, who raised his eyebrows slightly in shared confusion. After our careful restructuring of the family finances, what further estate planning could possibly require this level of formality? As you know, Harold continued, following the sale of the family home, we established a trust to manage the proceeds, with provisions for Clayton and Judith's care throughout their lifetime and equal distribution of any remaining assets between Rebecca and Tyler upon their passing. We nodded in unison, familiar with these arrangements that had replaced the original will that had sparked our family reckoning. Clayton and Judith have requested a modification to this arrangement. Harold removed a document from a folder before him. They wish to make an immediate partial distribution from the trust, specifically to allocate 15% of the current value to each of you now, rather than waiting for the eventual distribution. Tyler straightened in his chair. Wait, they want to give us part of our inheritance while they're still alive? That is correct, Harold confirmed. The remaining 70% would continue in trust for their lifetime needs, with the standard provisions for equal distribution of any remainder. I turned to my parents, bewildered by this unexpected proposal. But why? The trust was designed to ensure your financial security. Reducing the principal by 30% would significantly impact its growth potential. Dad cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with Mom before addressing us directly. We've been doing a lot of thinking since everything changed. About what really matters. About the mistakes we made. Mom picked up the thread with uncharacteristic directness. We realized we've been holding on to control of money, of property, of how our children should live their lives, as if that control was the most important legacy we could leave. It's not. We want to share what we have while we're still here to see you benefit from it, Dad continued. Not as leverage or manipulation, but as a genuine gift without strings attached. The contrast with their previous approach, using inheritance as a tool of control and favoritism, could not have been more stark. This wasn't just a financial adjustment, but a profound philosophical shift in how they viewed their relationship with us and with their resources. The amount would be approximately $42,000 each, Harold noted with his characteristic precision. Sufficient to be meaningful without compromising the security of the trust's primary purpose. Tyler and I exchanged glances, processing this unexpected development. In the previous chapter of our family story, he would have been calculating how quickly he could spend such a windfall on status symbols and temporary pleasures. The thoughtful consideration in his expression now suggested a very different perspective. May I ask what prompted this decision? I inquired, turning back to our parents. Mom's eyes grew slightly misty. Life is unpredictable. Your father's falls reminded us of that. We've spent too many years focusing on what happens after we're gone, using future promises as a substitute for present appreciation. We want you both to have the opportunity to use some of this money now, while we can share in whatever it brings to your lives, Dad added. Whether that's education, travel, a down payment on a home, whatever would be meaningful to you. Tyler leaned forward, his expression unusually solemn. I appreciate the intention behind this, really, but I'm not sure I should accept it. This was so unexpected that even Harold looked up from his documents in surprise. The thing is, Tyler continued, I'm just starting to stand on my own 2 feet financially, just beginning to understand what it means to earn my way, to contribute rather than just consume. He glanced at me, then back to our parents. I'm worried that a windfall right now might interrupt that growth somehow. The self-awareness, in his reluctance, so contrary to the entitled Tyler who would once have demanded his share and more, exemplified how profoundly he had changed. What if, he suggested after a moment's consideration, my portion was directed towards something specific? Maybe a dedicated fund for your healthcare needs as you age, or even a donation to the community garden program that serves your apartment complex. Dad looked momentarily stunned, then deeply moved by this response. That's very thoughtful. Son, we'll certainly consider those options. All eyes turned to me, awaiting my response to this unexpected offer. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, wanting to honor the genuine growth this proposal represented in my parents' perspective. I'm touched by the intention behind this, I began carefully. It represents a real shift in how you're thinking about family resources and relationships. Mom nodded encouragingly. But I think I'd like to propose an alternative as well. I continued. Rather than an immediate cash distribution, what if we established a family opportunity fund? A portion of the trust that we could all decide how to use together, perhaps for shared experiences like a family trip, or to support each other's meaningful goals when needed. Harold made a note on his legal pad. That could certainly be structured within the trust framework, a sub-account with joint decision-making protocols. I like that idea, Tyler said with genuine enthusiasm. It's not about each of us getting our share, but about creating something we can all benefit from together. Dad's expression softened as he looked between us. When did our children get so wise, Judith? Certainly wasn't from my example. They figured it out despite us, not because of us, Mom replied with gentle honesty. But perhaps we're all learning together now. Harold cleared his throat, bringing us back to the procedural aspects of the discussion. I'll draft several options based on today's conversation for your review. The beauty of a properly structured trust is its flexibility to accommodate evolving family priorities while maintaining appropriate protections. As we left the lawyer's office together, I felt a profound sense of closure to a chapter that had begun with that painful Sunday dinner announcement a year earlier. We had moved from a family defined by imbalance, unacknowledged contributions, and conditional love to one actively working toward equity, transparency, and genuine appreciation. Standing on the sidewalk in the autumn sunshine, I looked at these three people who had caused me so much hurt and frustration over the years. Dad, leaning on his cane but standing straighter somehow in his acceptance of his limitations. Mom, her nervous energy channeled into more constructive patterns. Tyler, growing into a man of substance and consideration rather than surface charm and self-absorption. Lunch? Mom suggested. There's a new place just down the block that's supposed to have excellent sandwiches. I'm in, Tyler replied. Immediately. My afternoon meeting got canceled. Dad nodded his agreement, then turned to me with a questioning look. Rebecca, will you join us? There was a time not so long ago when such an invitation would have felt like an obligation, another demand on my time and energy from family members who took my availability for granted. Now, it felt like a genuine choice, one I was free to accept or decline based on my own preferences rather than their expectations. I'd like that, I said, realizing I truly meant it. Let's go. As we walked together down the tree-lined street, fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet, I reflected on the journey we had taken. The deed to the house that had once been my hidden leverage was now a distant memory, replaced by something more valuable. A family deed of mutual respect and balanced care that we were all signatories to, all beneficiaries of, all responsible for maintaining. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real and authentic and evolving, just as we were. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that truly mattered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right, on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.